background credentials for talking about Common Core's standards. I was over 10 years ago in the Massachusetts Department of Education, where I was responsible for the development or revision of all of our K-12 standards in all major subjects. I was also responsible for completely revising our teacher licensing regulations and our teacher licensure tests. All of that was part of what I coordinated, and that is what is one of the major issues basically missing from today's so-called reform scheme. I also, years later, became a member of the State Board of Education in Massachusetts at the time that Common Core's standards were being developed, and I do know from being on the state board in Massachusetts what happened on a state board in response to what our commissioner was telling us. And he was being wooed regularly by the U.S. Department of Education because they badly wanted Massachusetts to adopt Common Core standards, a point raised by the previous speaker, and I will address that in a few minutes. But most recently, I was on Common Core's validation committee, 2009, 2010. I was the only English language arts standards expert on that less than 30-member committee. And Professor Milgram from Stanford's mathematics department was the only mathematician on that validation committee. And we were two of the 5 people who would not sign off at the end of the year saying that Common Core standards met the criteria that had been outlined in our original charge. We did not believe, and we indicated with our own analysis of standards, he did the math, I did the ELA, that they were not internationally benchmarked, which means they're not comparable to the best that's out there. They're not research-based, and they're not rigorous. This, of course, is the opposite of what is being told to this very day by many of the people supporting Common Core standards. But in any event, the point I'm making is that I was there from the inside, and I have been, and Professor Milgram has as well, for the past 5 years to 6 years, we've been writing critiques about Common Core's standards. Has anything changed? Not a word. They were frozen into stone 6 years ago. So far as we can see, they will be in cement for the next 100. There is no mechanism for changing them. Indeed, they have been copyrighted by the 2 private organizations that developed them, CCSSO and NGA, 2 of the groups that you were told about before. And while we have been testifying to state legislatures about the problems in these 2 sets of standards, and you have at least one sheet double on the problems with the English. The math didn't make it in, but there will be available to you the handout that Professor Milgram makes available called Missing, Delayed, or Muddled Topics in Common Core's Math Standards. This is what John was referring to at first. These will be available to you afterwards. He's now expanded his 2-pager to a 6-pager, just to give you more details for those of you who think you can understand more than just the standard algorithm issue, which is a major issue in K through 7. But he goes into what is missing in the high school standards, which are critical for STEM careers: science, technology, engineering, and math. And the handout that will be made available to you will go into all the topics that only people who understand math, science, and engineering can really understand. I don't, because I'm not a mathematician. Let me quickly go through some additions to the very good outline that Judy gave you of the history. I wanted to make it clear that, first of all, the testing consortia that are now doing most of the work across the country to develop tests for this year were funded by the USDE. That was one of the constitutional questions that has been raised by critics. USED, or DE, gave some of the stimulus money that had originally received to these 2 different privately developed groups for developing Common Core-based tests in 2010.
One more minute.
And then states were asked to join either one or both. Gates funded, by the way, the development of Common Core, and we should not underestimate all of the different groups that the Gates Foundation has funded, including the PTA, which 2 days ago backed out of appearing here. You should understand that this is rather startling for a group 2 days before this supposed to be an event to back out without providing a substitute. But it is one of the many Gates-funded groups that promote Common Core. There, so far, is a question that I think all of us should ask about part of the history that Judy gave us, and that is when state boards adopted Common Core standards, not one, because I testify before many state legislatures and have asked this question, not one asked the legislature for a cost-benefit analysis. This is on record, not one. And yet, in many states, any bill that's being proposed that has policy implications must have a cost-benefit analysis. Not one did. And two, not one state board asked its own higher education experts in math, engineering, science, or in literary scholarship for advice on the college readiness level of Common Core's high school standards. One would have thought they would, because it's the first time in our history we've ever had standards called college readiness. Most of them are just plain
10 seconds
standards. And then I would like to make it clear that it's to this day, it's not clear if any states really are backing out of Common Core. I'm involved with almost all of them directly. And so far, the states that have tried to come up with alternative standards are coming up with a warmed-over version of Common Core, no matter what they call them, whether they're called Sunshine Standards or whether they're called Pennsylvania's academic standards, they're still Common Core.
All right, thank you very much.
This is a serious problem.
All right,
Thank you.